one who was and is to come, the Almighty. Amen. I'm struck very much today by the text from Jeremiah. If you are keeping track, there are a number of times where it repeats the word trust, or those who don't trust, or exactly what they trust in. I've been parsing the words of this text all week. It's very interesting. So I want to talk about trust. It's kind of the word for the day. So what does it really mean? I mean, in general, what does it mean? I don't know if I'm good at answering that, because it means so many things. However, I think I got it. Maybe down to the nubbins of what trust is about. Vulnerability. So when you trust, you must, in some measure, make yourself vulnerable to the other. For example, tomorrow I will be getting onto a plane. The laughter is because you know that this is one of my life challenges. And there is something about the trust that you step over the threshold of the little ramp that leads you down to the plane, and you step the threshold through the little door, and not in control anymore. I must trust the pilot is in good health. The pilot has not had too much to drink. Sad to say. That the pilot, that everybody here is on the same page. We're going to go from this point to that point, and it's going to be well and safe and happy, and we must trust. Now, am I trusting in mortals? Well, kind of, yes. There's a trust of mortals. So according to this passage, I'm putting my trust in mortals. But I like to think of it now as more trusting in the laws of physics that will make that plane lift, and the physics that are involved in the wings not falling off, and the motors, giving enough momentum to keep the lift. All the parts that work together, it's based on math and physics. And somehow that's very impersonal and trustworthy. I can trust math before I trust mortals. So I get onto the plane. I also trust the chemists who make the little pill that I take. I'm dead serious about that, because there's a level of anxiety in being a hollow tube in the air 35,000 feet. And so there's all kinds of trust. I'm not sure that that's what Jeremiah is talking about when it says, kind of a condemnation here of those who trust in mere mortals. He's talking about something profoundly relational. Trust between human beings. It's a lot easier to trust the laws of physics, I think. It's impersonal. It either works or it doesn't. Human beings, even ones that mean well, even ones that go into a relationship meaning well, can fail. I mean, we just do in our relationships with each other. Have you ever hurt someone that you love? I mean, it's kind of inevitable. We don't mean to do it. Most of us, I believe, truly don't mean to hurt other people. We don't get up in the morning and thinking about how many people we can injure emotionally during the day. But sometimes it happens. I think what Jeremiah is saying is when we trust in mortals, as if the relationship between person to person is going to be so sound and so sure, when we know otherwise. So whom can you trust? He says, happy are those who trust in the Lord. And interestingly, the second half of that sentence, whose trust is the Lord. Who trust in the Lord and whose trust is the Lord. I'm not sure exactly what that means. I had to sit with that for a while and think about what is he really saying there? I think it's this. In human beings, we know some level that we make mistakes and we fail. And that as much as we desire to love, as much as we desire goodness and health, we're imperfect. We just are. And when we mess up, we can practice repair. That's a gift that we have. But we have to do that. With God, God's relationship with us is completely different than it is between human beings. Why? Because God's trustworthy. God doesn't foul it up. There is a level of perfection in God's love that does not ever fail. So that's why then it goes on to talk about shrubs and trees, which I love. The prophet uses something very, very common to make a very dramatic point. To trust in mere mortals is like being sagebrush, being a shrubbery, where the roots are shallow. And a good strong wind, what happens to sagebrush? It just starts rolling across the desert. You know, there's a sense in which the image here is that trust, when it is misplaced, is not very life-giving. But trust, when it is in God, which Jeremiah thinks is never misplaced, that's the claim of the text. If you trust in God, it is never a misplaced trust. It is never in vain. It is like being a tree planted by a river or a stream that has an endless source of water, of nutrients, of nourishment. Even in a time of drought, the tree is not anxious. Isn't that an interesting way of saying it? That's what the words say. The tree is not, I don't know any anxious trees. I mean, I've honestly never really looked. I've never stood before a tree and wondered, is this tree anxious? Maybe there are more than I realize. But you get the image here. It's a metaphor for how human beings can have what is life-giving when they are tapped into the source of all life. The New Testament uses the words of living water. John's Gospel, living water. But it's the same image. Where there is water, there is life. And what is water for us spiritually? It is only God. Trusting, sinking your roots in to things other than God, looking to things other than God, looking to people other than God, fails in the long term. But trusting in God is sure. It is what gives us life, and I love the language here, the metaphor gets extended, it's how fruit comes. Shrubs are not generally fruit-bearing, but trees are. Trees that have that perpetual source of life. Great imagery, great metaphor, I think. And worthy of our time to think about, in what do we trust? Is our trust misplaced? Because sometimes it is. I mean, sometimes it is. Sometimes if we just examine our hearts and our lives, we realize, yeah, I've been trusting in my retirement account. That's just going to be enough. You know, and that can go like that, right? You can turn around one day and that is gone, right? Things that we trust in, people will work their whole life to build a business, to get an education, to have a reputation, to build a medical practice, to do whatever, and then something can happen and it's zoop, taken away. Life is quirky that way. A surgeon could be in a car accident and lose the use of her hands. And then what? If though many, many years you spent learning the craft of being a skilled surgeon is suddenly gone, then who are you? There's some of you know, I know the Pecks know, and some of you else might know, the weekend retreat called Curcio. Great experience. It's a great experience. It's a wonderfully intense spiritual retreat. I hope someday you'll all get a chance to go on it. I've been involved in it for years. And one of the things that we do in the initial time when you come to that weekend is there's some reflection time. And you're given a kind of a rule as you're meeting all the other strangers in the room, at least the ones I've been on as a clergy. We ask people, say we're going to have the 5 of you back here in a group, and none of you know each other, and you're going to introduce yourselves to each other and talk about your lives. But here are things you can't talk about: your spouse, your job, your children. Your spouse, job, and children. Can't talk about those things, but talk about your life. And early on, you find people in a panic. You find people in a panic. People who suddenly come to the realization that without those 3 identifying things, what am I? Who am I? Do I have a life? And then the next question, in what have I trusted? Where have I laid my identity? What is the foundation of my life? And so begins a very intensive weekend of unpacking that part of yourself, and hopefully in the course of those days recovering or rediscovering the wondrous gift of being you. And one of the ways in that retreat, I'm just going to give you away the little secret, one of the ways that happens is playing. Get a room full of grown-ups who start to play. It is so much fun. Because you realize you've been burying it all along. There's this child inside of you, this creativity that comes bursting out. And am I lying? There's more laughter than you have ever laughed in your life. It's that discovery moment of where trust belongs to the only one that can really be trustworthy, and that is God who created us, God who loves us, God who redeems us, God who sanctifies us, God who is that living water that makes us able to withstand even a drought and bear fruit. When nothing else is bearing fruit, we bear fruit because we are connected with the source of all life, the God who has called us and who loves us. Those are pretty good words. Jeremiah knows what he's talking about. Of course, he's preaching to a people that he believes, and God has given him this word as his preaching ministry, that the people of Israel have trusted in everything but God. I mean, anything but God. And very self-satisfied about it. And he warns them, listen, y'all, your roots are not going into the living water. You're like shrubs, soon to be rolling in the desert, dried up, shriveling, longing for life that you don't have. I love this season of the year, in part because Epiphany is this wonderful time of always considering what of God is being revealed. Clearly in this text, it's God's trustworthiness. It's an attribute of who God is, one of many, many aspects of who God is. God is perfect in trustworthiness. And Jeremiah's language here, the green tree. The green we use in church, to me, is very important. And I think I've mentioned this before. This is a juicy green. Look at that. It's a life-giving green. It's not an olive green or olive drab. Sometimes churches can have greens that are unfortunate shades of green. They don't speak of this juiciness, which is what the teachings of Christ and the teachings in the Old Testament, what they try to get at. This sense of what gives life. We don't follow God or the ways of God or the commandments of God because God will smite us. It's because God is life itself. God is a God of life. And what is given to us is the chance to have an abundant and free and joyous life. And there's only one way, according to the scriptures, that can happen, and that's if we're connected to God, rooted God. Our identity rests in God. So we do well to think on the word trust. In whom do you trust? In what do you trust? Do a fearless and searching inventory of your soul. It's okay if you have trusted in things other than God, because you have an opportunity to dial it back and to pray a prayer something like, help my unbelief. Help me. Years ago, if Doug were here, he would tell you this is true. I used to get mortally afraid of even looking at planes. Looking at planes in the sky, going across the sky. That used to freak me clear out. Because it didn't seem possible. How can that be? Never mind my getting on one. Okay, that was just like not part of the universe. And in part I tell this story because it's a silly story on myself. I've had to overcome that lack of trust. That what is the worst that's going to happen? We die? Well, that, yeah, okay, that's bad. I'm probably not going to like that. But really, is that the worst thing that can happen? In my universe, in a universe of faith, it's like, isn't God there too? Isn't God up there? And isn't God in here? And isn't God at the moment of death? And isn't even God after death? Well, like, where are you going to go where God is not there? That's what I have to tell myself. Remind myself, it's Psalm 139, by the way. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee? There's nowhere to go. And so there are ways in which you and I'm inviting you to practice trust. Dialing back, trusting in things other than God. And finding ways of saying, all right, I don't know about this, but I'm going to step over that threshold and trust God for my life, for my death, for my salvation, for my family, for everything going on in the world. I will trust God to be the source of what is life-giving. It's quite the challenge. But I believe that's what the text is about today. It reveals this constant invitation from God. Not just that God is trustworthy. I think we knew that. I want to say maybe what we have lost sight of is that God invites us to trust for a reason. Because there is an invitation to life and health. It's not God's ego. I want you to trust me because I am like no other. It's almost arrogant. No, God's call to trust has to do with giving you and I the very best life for which we were created. That's awesome. That's an awesome invitation.